Linga Sharira. It is necessary that we regard time as a spatial concept, considered in relation to our two new points of reference, the world and consciousness, or psychic life. The idea of time arises through knowledge of the world by means of sensual receptivity, and as explained previously, it is precisely because of the properties of our sensual receptivity that we see the world as though through a narrow slit. Therefore, out of this the following questions arise. What accounts for this existence in a world of illusory motion? That is, why do we not see, through this slit, the same thing? Why, behind the slit, do changes proceed, creating the illusion of motion? That is, how and in what manner does the focus of our receptivity overrun the world of phenomena? In addition to all of this, it is necessary to remember that through the same slit through which we see the world, we also observe ourselves, and see in ourselves changes similar to the changes that we see in the rest of things. Why can we then not extend this slit? It is necessary to answer these questions, but first it is important to note that, within the limits of our usual observation, our receptivity is always conditioned in the same manner, and we cannot escape these conditions. In other words, it is entrapped, as it were, on some plane, above which it cannot rise. These limitations, or that plane we call the inner world, consciousness, or level of consciousness. In the outer world we refer to things as matter, or the density of matter. The word density is used in this regard not in the sense of a solid, liquid or gas, but in the sense of the physical, astral and mental plane. Excepting momentarily the terminology employed by contemporary theosophical literature. Our usual psychic life proceeds upon some definite plane of consciousness, or matter, and never rises above it. If our receptivity could rise above this plane, then it would undoubtedly perceive simultaneously, below itself, a far greater number of events than it usually observes while on the plane. Just as a man ascending a mountain, or riding a hot air balloon begins to see simultaneously, and in one moment, many things that it is impossible to see simultaneously, or at one moment from below. The movement of two trains toward one another along the same track that will result in a collision. The approach of an enemy detachment towards a sleeping encampment. Two cities divided by a ridge and so on. So too will a consciousness rising above the plane on which it usually functions, observe simultaneously, events divided for ordinary consciousness by periods of time. These will be the events that ordinary consciousness never sees together, as cause and effect. The work and the payment. The crime and the punishment. The movement of trains towards one another and their collision. The approach of the enemy and the battle. Sunrise and sunset, morning and evening, day and night, spring, summer, autumn and winter. The birth and death of man. The angle of perception will enlarge during such an ascent, and the moment will expand. If we were to imagine a receptivity that is on a level higher than our consciousness, possessing a broader angle of view than this receptivity that we are able to grasp, as viewing something simultaneously, i.e. as a given moment, rather than all that is happening for us during a certain length of time. Minutes, hours, a day or a month. Within the limits of its moment, such a consciousness would not be in a position to discriminate between before, now, and after. All of this would be for it now, and that now would expand. However, in order for this to occur, it would be necessary to liberate ourselves from matter, because matter is nothing more than the conditions of space and time in which we ordinarily dwell. Hence arises the question, can consciousness leave the conditions of a given material existence, without itself undergoing fundamental changes? Without disappearing altogether, as those of a positivistic view would affirm? This is a debatable question, therefore later we shall analyze examples and evidence of this. However, speaking for the moment of the hypothesis that our consciousness can leave the conditions of a given materiality, we need to establish what needs to happen during this departure. There would ensue the expansion of the moment, i.e. all that we are able to apprehend in time would become something like a single moment, in which the past, the present and the future would all be observable at once. This shows the relativity of motion as depending upon, for us, the limitation of the moment, which includes only a very small part of the moments of life perceived on this plane. We have every right to say not that time is deduced from motion, but that motion is sensed because of a time sense. We have that sense, and therefore we sense motion. Our time sense is the sensation of changing moments, and if we did not possess this time sense, then we would not feel motion. A time sense is itself, in substance, the limit or the surface of our space sense. Where space sense ends, there time sense begins. It has been made clear that time is identical in its properties to space, i.e. that it has all the properties of space extension. However, we feel it as time, that is as something specific, but at the same time inexpressible. In other words, intrinsically bound up with motion. This inability to sense time, spatially, is a consequence of time sense being a misty, space sense. By means of our time sense we feel, obscurely, the new characteristics of space, extending out from the sphere of 3 dimensions. However, what is the time sense, and why does there arise this illusion of motion? It is possible to answer this question adequately, only by studying the forms and levels of psychic life. I is a complex quantity, and within this expression, proceeds a continuous motion. The nature of this motion can be discussed later, however this very motion, inside of us, creates the illusion of motion around us. Motion in the material world. The mathematician Riemann understood that when higher dimensions of space are in question, then time, by some means, translates itself into space, and he regarded atomic mass as an entry portal from the 4th dimension into 3-dimensional space. In one of his books, Hinton writes about surface tension. The relationship of a surface to a solid, or of a solid to a higher solid, is one that we often find in nature. A surface is nothing more, nor less, than the relation between two things. Two bodies touch one another, and the surface is simply the relationship of one to the other. If our space is in the same correlation with higher space, as is a 2-dimensional surface to our space, then it may be considered that our space is really the surface, that is, the place of contact of higher dimensional spaces. It is a fact worthy of noting, that upon the surface of a fluid, different laws apply, from those which hold true throughout the volume. There are a whole series of facts grouped together, under the name of surface tensions, that are of great importance to physics, by which the behavior of the surfaces of liquids are governed. It may well emerge someday, that the laws of our universe are in fact, but surface tensions, of some higher universe. If the surface be regarded as a medium, lying between bodies, then indeed it will have no weight, but will be a powerful means of transmitting vibration. Furthermore, it would be unlike any other substance, and it would be impossible to get rid of it. However perfect a vacuum be made, there would be in this vacuum just as much of this unknown medium, i.e. of that surface, as there was before. Matter would pass freely through this medium. Vibrations of this medium would tear asunder portions of matter. Involuntarily, a conclusion could be drawn, that this medium was unlike any ordinary matter. These would be very different properties to reconcile in one and the same substance. Is there then anything in our experience that corresponds to this medium? Do we suppose the existence of any medium, through which matter freely moves, and yet by its very vibrations destroys the combinations of matter? Some medium that is present in every vacuum, no matter how perfect, is weightless and yet can never be laid hold of. That substance, which possesses all of these qualities, is known as the ether. The properties of ether are a constant source of investigation in science. However, taking into consideration ideas previously shared, it would be interesting to look at the world, supposing that we are not in it, but on ether, where ether is the surface of contact between two bodies of higher dimension. Hinton here expresses an unusually interesting thought, and brings the idea of ether closer to the idea of time. A materialistic or energetic understanding of the contemporary physics of ether is a dead-end siding or blind alley. For Hinton, ether is not a substance, but only a surface, the boundary of something. But of what exactly? Again, not that of a substance, but the boundary, the surface or the limit of one form of receptivity, and the beginning of another. In one sentence, the walls and fences of that materialistic blind alley are broken down, then before our consciousness open up wide horizons of regions, hitherto unexplored. 4-dimensional space, if we try to imagine it to ourselves, will be the infinite repetition of our space, of our infinite 3-dimensional sphere. just as a line is the infinite repetition of a point. Much will become clearer when we consider that the fourth dimension must be sought for in time. It will become clear what is meant by the fact that it is possible to regard a four-dimensional body as a tracing of the movement in space of a three-dimensional body, in a different direction not confined within that space. The direction not confined in three-dimensional space, in which any three-dimensional body moves, is the direction of time. Any existent three-dimensional body is at the same time moving in time, and leaves as a tracing of its movement the temporal, or four-dimensional body. We never see or feel this body, because of the limitations of our receptive apparatus. However, we see the section of it only, which section we call the three-dimensional body. We are therefore in error, thinking that a three-dimensional body is in itself something real. It is the projection of a four-dimensional body, its picture, the image of it, on our plane. A four-dimensional body is an infinite number of three-dimensional bodies. That is to say, a four-dimensional body is an infinite number of moments of existence of a three-dimensional body. Its states and positions, any three-dimensional body that we see, appears as a single figure. One of a series of pictures in a time-lapse or freeze-frame media strip. Four-dimensional space, time, is really the distance between forms, states and positions of the same body. All different or various bodies, or at least those seeming different to us. It separates those states, forms, and positions, each from the other, and yet also binds them together, into, for us, some kind of incomprehensible whole. This incomprehensible whole can be formed in time, out of one physical body, and out of different bodies. It is easier for us to imagine that temporal whole is related to one physical body. If we consider the physical body of a person, we can find in it, aside from its matter, something else. True, that something is changing all the time, but undoubtedly, one and the same from birth until death. This something is the linga shariri of Eastern philosophy, i.e. the form on which our physical body is molded, as mentioned by H.P. Blavatsky in her publication of The Secret Doctrine. Eastern philosophy regards the physical body as something impermanent, that is in a state of perpetual interchange with its surroundings. All particles come and go, continuously, and after just 1 second, the body is already not absolutely the same as it was previously. Today, it is to a considerable extent altered from yesterday, and after 7 years, it is a quite different body. However, despite all of this, something always persists, from birth up until death, changing its aspect a little, but remaining ultimately the same. This is linga sharira. Linga sharira is the form, the image, changing but remaining the same. The image of any individual that we are able to represent to ourselves is not linga sharira. However, if we try to represent to ourselves, mentally, within our mindscape, the image of some person from birth to death, along with all the peculiarities and traits of childhood, adolescence, adulthood and senility, as if extended in time, then this will be linga sharira. Form pertains to all things. We say that every thing consists of matter and form, therefore under the category of matter, as mentioned, is predicated, the cause of a lengthy series of mixed sensations, but matter without form is incomprehensible to us. We cannot imagine matter without form. However, we can think of and imagine form without matter. The thing, i.e. the union of form and matter, is never constant. It changes perpetually over the course of time. This idea afforded Newton the opportunity to build his theory on fluents and fluxions. Newton came to the conclusion that constant quantities do not exist in nature. Variables, however, do exist, which he described as flowing or fluents. The velocities with which fluents change were called by Newton fluxions. From the standpoint of this theory, all things known to us, humanity, plants, animals and planets, are all fluents, and they differ by the magnitude of their fluxions. However, the thing changing constantly in time, sometimes a great deal, and very quickly, as in the case of a living body, still remains one and the same. The body of a person in youth, and the body of an elder in senility, these are one and the same thing. Though we know that in the old body, there is not one atom remaining, that was in the adolescent. But matter changes, but something remains one under all changes, and this something is linga sharira. Newton's theory is valid for the three-dimensional world existing in time, as in this world, there is nothing constant, and all is variable. Because every consecutive moment, that thing is already not that which it was previously. We never see linga sharira, we see always its parts, and they appear to us variable. However, if we observe more attentively, we shall observe that this is an illusion. Things of three dimensions are unreal and variable. They cannot be real, because they do not exist in reality. Just as the imaginary sections of a solid do not exist, four-dimensional bodies alone are real. In one of his lectures contained in the book A Pluralist Universe, Professor James calls attention to Professor Bergson's remark that science studies always only the T of the universe, i.e. not the universe in its entirety, but the moment, the temporal section of the universe. Comparing the third and the fourth dimensions, it is necessary to understand that here it is not a question of two spatially different domains, but of two modes of perception of the same one world, of one space. Furthermore, it is necessary to understand that all the objects known to us exist not only in the categories in which we perceive them, but in an infinite number of others that we do not know how to sense. Another approach to understanding all of this is to seek everything in the surrounding world that is not included in the framework of three dimensions. Everything, therefore, that we are accustomed to regard as non-existent. If variability is a sign of the three-dimensional world, then we must seek for that which is constant. Furthermore, we are accustomed to regard as really existing only that which can be measured in length, breadth, and height. However, measurability is too crude a criterion of existence, because measurability itself is too conditioned a concept. It is necessary to widen the boundaries of the really existing, for many things that cannot be measured still have a real existence, more real indeed than most things that can be measured. Thus, we may presume in man three minds: the first, the mind of the body, which manifests itself in instincts, and the constant mechanisms of body. The second is personality, or not self, a complex and constantly changing I that we think we know, and in which we are conscious of ourselves. The third, the mind of our entire life, the truer self, a greater and higher I, which is the linga sharira. On our level of development, these three minds know very little about one another, and can communicate only in trance states, ecstatic states, in dreams, in hypnotic or in mediumistic states. More specifically, the second mind is the mind studied by Freudian psychology, i.e. reflected activity, sensations, representations, concepts, emotions and desires. That, which is controlled by impressions coming from the external world and the body, the first mind. The third mind or spirit is those higher principles which direct, under certain conditions may direct, the life of the second mind, the region of the unknown, for us. Understanding and applying these divisions will help control time. The only motion that exists in the world is the rapid succession of different I's or emotions, each of which calls itself me and follows different objects, themes and images in the focus, or main arena of our consciousness. Were all that is to enter simultaneously into the focus of perception, were we able to embrace with our mind all that ever entered our perception, all that is never clearly illuminated by thought, though affecting or impacting the mind, then the individual might find themselves in the midst of a motionless universe, containing simultaneously all that usually lies for a person in the remote depths of memory, in the past, and all that lies at a great distance from them, in the future. Matter is but a mode of blindness. Outside of the conditions of matter one might possess simultaneously things which, from our point of view, are incompatible, conflicting and mutually exclusive. One would be able to be in several places at once, to assume different aspects, to shape-shift and perform at the same time contradictory and mutually exclusive actions. From the point of view of eternity, a line perpendicular to time. Time in no way differs from other lines and extensions of space, i.e. length, breadth and height. This means that, just as space contains things we do not see, or to put it differently, more things exist than those we see, so in time too, events exist before our consciousness comes into contact with them. And they still exist after our consciousness has withdrawn from them. Consequently, extension in time is extension into an unknown space, and hence time is the fourth dimension of space. What we must do is expand the present, that now, to include always and forever.